Hey, this is Rabbi David Fohrman. I am here with Ari Levisohn, and welcome to Into the Verse. Ari, you were going to talk to me about something you found in Parshat Vayera.
Parshat Vayera. All right, so Rabbi Fohrman, one of your favorite games to play when we're looking at the parsha is, we first look for, have you heard this before? Find some parallels between stories, and then you like to play this game called Cast of Characters.
Oh, I love Cast of Characters.
Right, so how does that work?
Well, whenever you find a set of intertextual parallels, you find that the language in a certain story kind of matches up to the language of another story, and you're convinced that it's not a coincidence. The first stage, you have to be convinced that it's not a coincidence. You need to see enough corner pieces of the puzzle, enough edge pieces, enough middle pieces to be pretty confident that there is a picture to be seen. But you don't quite know what it means. You're trying to make sense of what the picture is, even though kind of the jigsaw pieces are matching up, and it really doesn't seem coincidental. It really does seem that story A is echoing story B in some kind of way. One of the ways you can get to the meaning of what's going on is playing this little game I call Cast of Characters, which is asking yourself, what are the characters in story one? Who are the characters in story two? And how do they match up to each other? Which character in story two is character in story one, playing, so to speak. So that's what I mean by Cast of Characters. And that, my experience has been, that often is a good tip-off towards what the constellation of connections between the two stories might actually mean.
Right. And something that you've pointed out before is that it rarely works as neatly and cleanly as you would like it to.
Oh, it never works as cleanly as you. But I think that's by design.
Yeah.
In other words, what the Torah will do all sorts of psychedelic things with Cast of Characters. Characters will match up in the strangest of ways. You never would have expected that this character would be playing some other role in a previous story. Similarly, sometimes characters come together. Sometimes two characters are playing aspects of a single character in one story, sort of breaking apart that character and playing one half of them or another half of them. Similarly, sometimes you've got characters that will shift, that will begin playing one character but then shift to another. And in my experience, this kind of stuff is also not happenstance. There's deep meaning that emerges from these kind of strange twists in the characters, and it sounds like you may have found some of that. So I'm eager to
hear. It's one of those psychedelic cast of character surprise twists that I found today and really got me excited and I want to talk about.
And just as a disclaimer here, Ari has not vetted any of this with me before, so I'll be completely surprised by what he has to share with me. And Ari, I have no idea whether I can make any sense of it in the moment, but I'll definitely give it the old college try.
Yeah. All right. Time for the parallels itself. There's two stories, really back-to-back chapters in this week's parsha, where the parallels they're almost like screaming at you. They're jumping out.
So before we get to the parallels, let's just introduce ourselves. You're talking about Genesis 18 and 19. This is the story of Abraham entertaining the guests that come to his home, seemingly angels, and he feeds them well. They reveal at the very end of the story that Sarah's going to have a child. Sarah laughs. She's not really sure whether this is going to happen. There's some dialogue about why Sarah's laughing. Abraham escorts the guests away. That's story number 1 in chapter 18. Story number 2 then talks about the what's going on in Sodom, right? Story number 2 is going to talk about the journey of 2 of these angels into Sodom, how they come to encounter Lot there, how Lot takes care of them, invites them into his house, how a mob assembles at the door seeking to molest them, how Lot will defend them against the mob, but at the expense of giving his own daughters seemingly to be raped by the mob. So Lot's choices here are what we might say checkered, if we would call that, if we would speak charitably about the moral complexion of Lot's choices here. He, on the one hand, defends his guests, but he does so at the expense of his own daughters. Seemingly, by the way, doing it in a way which is odd or definitely makes you raise an eyebrow. He says to the mob, please don't molest these guests, because for this they've sought refuge beneath the roof, the beams of my house, leading the reader to think 1 second, if anybody is seeking refuge under the beams of your house, wouldn't it be your own daughters before these guests?
Right.
But Lot seems oblivious to that. But be that as it may, that's your really quickie summary of chapter 18, chapter 19.
Okay, so immediately when we begin reading the second chapter, these two chapters, chapter 19, the lights start going off in our head of like, wait a minute, we've heard this before. Angels coming and visiting someone, that person, inviting them in.
So let's actually take a look at the verses themselves. When you talk about angels coming to visit someone, what do you mean? So what happens is these two angels, they come to the city, Vayavo Shnei HaMalachim Sodoma, and Ari, you're suggesting that reminds us of angels coming to Abraham. Angels came to Abraham, angels now come to Sodom, right? But it's not just that. Lot Yoshev B'Shar Sodom. I hear about where Lot is.
He's sitting in the doorway.
He's sitting in a doorway. He wasn't the only one that was sitting in the doorway. You go to the beginning of chapter 18. Abraham was sitting also in the gateway of his tent. We know when this took place.
What time of day?
It was in the hottest part of the day, and we hear now about the Shnei Malachim coming to Sodom. Again, we hear about the time of day, Ba'erev. So far, a remarkable confluence. It sounds like the approach of the angels to Sodom really is echoing the approach of the angels to Abraham. Not every detail is the same, but the structure of the details is the same.
Right.
I hear about the two angels coming. I hear the time of day. I hear where the person's sitting, right? And in both cases, I then hear about how the person goes and greets the angels. In the case of Abraham, Vayisayna Vayar, he sees Hinesh Lashon Hashim Nitzivim Alav Vayar Vayaretz L'Krasam. He goes and he runs out to greet them. He bows before them. And with Lot, Vayakam L'Krasam, he doesn't quite run to them, but he does get up to greet them.
Right, that same word, Likratam.
Right, same word, Likratam.
Yeah.
And Vayishtachu Apayim Arza, he bows just as Abraham. So you got 7 or 8 parallels, more or less in order.
And it keeps going in the next verse.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So it says, "Vayomer hinei Adoni suana al beit avdecham." He tells them, "Turn towards the house of your servant, Vilino, and come and rest and spend the night." And then the next thing, and reglechem, and wash your feet. Right, not just wash your feet, but also come and eat. And he feeds them food.
Yeah, but all this has parallels in the Abraham story where we hear, please don't leave. Yukach namat mayim, take a little bit of water. Rachatzu raglechem, the same language for the washing of the feet. Stay here while I feed you. And it really seems like chapter 19 is evoking what Abraham did for the angels when they came to his tent. Somehow Lot is doing a version of the same thing.
Right, exactly. And at this point, if we're going to set up the cast of characters, it should be pretty straightforward. Right? So we have the angels who are playing the angels. They're coming. They're the guests.
Yep.
And we have the host, who in the first story is Avraham, and the second story is Lot.
Pretty straightforward. But things, alas, are rarely straightforward when you play cast of characters. So where's the twist, Ari?
Okay, so, and first of all, just give some credit to our colleague Evan Wiener, who is the one who pointed out this twist. Okay, so all of a sudden in verse 4, before the angels even get a chance to lie down and spend the night, V'anshe Anshe Sodom nasabu al habayit minar vad zaken kol ha'am mikatzeh. So the people of the city of Sodom, they come and they surround the house from young to old, kol ha'am, the entire nation, vayomru lo, and they call to Lot and they say to him, Ayeh ha'anashim asher barei lacha halayla. Where are these men who came to you?
Right, so where Ari's going here is that the language that the mob is using, when the mob speaks to Lot, the mob comes, they gather around, they are going to break into the house, and they say to Lot, where are these people who came in the middle of the night that you hosted? Hotziam Elena Venedotam, send them out to us and we will molest them, we'll know them, seemingly a euphemism for molesting them. But the problem is that language, ayeh hanashim asher bo elach halayla, especially that word ayeh, right, for where, which I don't want to say is an unusual word for where. The more standard word for the where is apho. The ayeh, as I argued in The Beast That Crouches at the Door, my first book, ayeh seems to be a different nuance than apho. Apho is a genuine request for location. Ayeh really means where have they gone. Ayeh hanashim asher bo elach halayla, where did they go? those guys. We're after those guys. How come we don't see them? Where are those men that came to you in the night? So the problem is that language echoes something else in chapter 18, which is a real head scratcher. What happens is the angels come and they say to Abraham back in chapter 18, Aye Sarah Ishtecha, where is Sarah, your wife? And Abraham says, Hine ba'oel, here she is, she's in the tent. So the point is that in both stories you have this unusual word for where, aye, right? And the problem is that the people who say the aye, who ask the question aye, don't seem to match up to each other.
Right.
So the issue is that back in chapter 18, there were good guys asking aye. Those were the angels. The angels were asking Abraham, where is Sarah? Because they wanted to bless her. They wanted to bless her seemingly with this child and say, Aye Sarah Ishtecha, where is Sarah? And Abraham says, oh, she's back in the tent. Now, similarly, in this case, there's another question, aye, and the answer basically also is they're back there.
Right.
Although he doesn't say that, Lot, but presumably that's the answer.
Right.
The people are being sheltered by Lot, and so they're back inside. But the problem is that if you play cast of characters, the people asking this question, where are the men who came to you last night, Lot, in chapter 19, are bad guys, very much bad guys. They are the mob. So Ari's question mark is, 1 second. First I had angels playing angels. The angels in chapter 19 were playing the angels in chapter 18. But then all of a sudden, the mob in chapter 19 starts to play the angels in chapter 18. Because the angels, as the story progresses in chapter 18, start to ask, where is Sarah? But now, the moment they're asking, where is Sarah, that is mob-like, right, in chapter 19, because there's a mob that says, where are these men who came to you last night?
Right. And if the mob is now playing the angels, and the angels are now the subject of the question, aye, then who are the angels playing?
That's an interesting question, because, yes, the angels have now gone to the object of the question, aye. So who are the angels now? The answer is the angels are playing Sarah.
The angels are playing Sarah.
Right, which is strange, because the angels back in 18 had blessed Sarah, but now the angels are playing a kind of Sarah,
Right.
the one about whom the question aye is being asked, whether they're being sheltered in the house. And it all seems pretty confusing.
It all seems pretty confusing.
Angels playing Sarah.
Right.
You've got mob playing angels. Seems like a case of musical chairs
Yes.
and cast of characters.
It's like music. Everyone's shifting over. But before we get ahead of ourselves, if that's true that they are playing Sarah, we would expect to see a little bit more where they continue to play this role. And I think if you just look at the next verse, in verse 6, Vayitzei lehem Lot. So Lot goes out to the mob. Hapetcha, he goes out the door. Vadelet sagar acharav, and the door closes behind him.
Right.
Now, that language of hapetcha and acharav is also familiar, because when Sarah, in the previous chapter, she was hanging out in the tent, and what does it say in verse 10?
Yep, it says that Sarah shomat petacho v'hu acharav. Sarah was listening to all of this, eavesdropping on this conversation with the angels and her husband, petach ohel, at the doorway of the tent, v'hu acharav. Hu acharav means what here, Ari? Who is acharav?
Yeah, so the Mefarshim have, the commentators have different ways of understanding this. Either the door was behind the angels or behind Abraham, but the point here is that Sarah's on one side of the door, and Abraham and the angels are on the other side of the door. And if we go back to chapter 19 now, right, there's, this scene is divided, right? It's like if you have on a stage, right, they'll put this prop to divide everyone on set. And there are the people who are behind the door, and there are the people who are in front of the door, right? The people who are in front of the door now are Lot and the mob. And now who's behind the door? Who is inside?
The angels. And again, the angels are playing Sarah.
Again, the angels are playing Sarah.
Okay. So, Ari, it does seem rather confounding.
Right.
We seem to have the character in chapter 18 of these angels and Sarah seem to undergo some kind of weird transformation as the story replays itself in chapter 19. And plus, of course, we're focusing on the technicalities on how these characters match up, but all of this is in service of understanding what in the world is going on.
Right.
Why should it be that this story in chapter 19 is echoing so closely chapter 18? What larger message does the author, does God want us to understand by crafting chapter 19 out of the stuff of chapter 18?
Right. And so the first thing I want to do is just think about, like, what would that mean for the angels to be replacing Sarah? And I think if you just kind of go in the beginning of this story, remember the fact that originally the angels didn't want to come in. They didn't want to come inside. And Lot actually insists that they come inside, and eventually they give in, they come inside, and then they're inside his house. And all of a sudden, they come into his house, and now it's like they're playing the role of Sarah. They're playing the role of the family that's inside.
Actually, it is kind of interesting. Getting back to the point I raised to you earlier, this seems to confirm the question I raised to you, or just the remarkable fact that Lot is treating the angels as if they're family members, right?
Right.
That language, he said, Al Kain Bo B'Tsel Karati, what are you doing to molest my guests? They're seeking refuge beneath the beams of my house. That's what you would say about your daughters. So strangely, he's treating the angels, this extended family, as if they're not extended family, as if they really are family, and hence these intertextual parallels that you're pointing out that treat the angels as if they're Sarah sort of makes sense, that at least from Lot's eyes.
Right.
Lot is dealing with the angels as if they're just another daughter, another person, another female to be protected. Because if you think about what Abraham is doing, why did Abraham have Sarah inside? Answer is, it's like, you don't know who these guests are. I mean, like, Abraham doesn't know they're angels.
Yeah.
For all Abraham knows, they're hijackers, So you're not going to have your wife out. What he's doing is basically trying to assess the situation and take and accept the risk on his own while he leaves his wife back in the house in the more protected area, and she's eavesdropping. So you really see that Abraham is dealing with his wife protectively, in marked contrast to Lot, who's not doing that for his daughters, but is doing that for the guests and treating them as if they are family, as if they are the Sarah of the other story.
Right. Exactly. And that alone, right? If she was just, all we knew was that Lot was treating the angels like they were part of his family. Seems like that is not such a bad thing. I mean, certainly very friendly of him, very nice and gracious of him to be doing that.
But the problem, of course, is at what expense?
At what expense? Because there is another character in the story, which is Lot's actual family, the daughters.
Family. Yep.
And what actually happens to them. So if we keep reading in verse 7, right? Remember that the mob comes, they want to do all sorts of terrible things to the angels. And Lot responds.
I've got these two daughters, Asher lo yadu ish. They've never been intimate with a man. Otziana et hen aleim. I'll give them over to you, vasulan kata beinechem, and you do as good in your eyes.
Now that language of hine li banot, behold, I have these daughters.
Yeah, hine ben l'sara ishtacha.
Hine ben l'sara ishtacha. Right. And originally, the angels in chapter 18, the angels came to Abraham and said, "Behold, Sarah will have a son." Lot says, "Behold, I have these two daughters."
So the behold about children in the original story in 18, right? Hine ben l'sara ishtacha. There's an announcement by the angels that Sarah is going to have a child, and here there's an announcement by Lot, almost as if in this one moment, Lot is playing angel, but a very naughty angel indeed. He saying about the children, I have these children who haven't known any man. Otziana et hen aleim. I will send them out to you. So what's interesting is
send them out.
Send them out.
The angels come and promise her, you are going to have this child which you didn't have before. Lot has this child and says, I'm going to now give them up. I'm going to relinquish these two daughters.
Yes.
In other words,
chapter 18, there was something also going out from Sarah, but in going out, the child would be born and would be recognized and accepted as family.
Right.
Right. Whereas here, the going out has exactly the opposite effect, is taking daughters and essentially disowning them.
Right. And as you said before, it's musical chairs.
Angels are becoming like Sarah at the very moment that the daughters are becoming the inverse of Sarah's children.
Right.
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 They're coming out of this nurturing place, a home, and just like there's going to be children coming out of Sarah, right? But instead of Sarah doing what's natural, which is laying claim to the children, saying, this is mine, what Lot is doing is exactly the opposite, saying, those that should be mine, I have nothing to do with.
Exactly. And this goes from, and then it goes from.
So I know what you're suggesting, in a way, if I get this right, is that the jarring change in cast of characters is sort of meant to highlight Lot doing something really weird.
Right.
Right. What Lot's doing is taking people who are family and shaking things up and saying, okay, you're not family anymore. You guys, you are family. So you, who used to have a simple, like, who were the angels? Obviously, they're like angels. The angels in chapter 19 connect to the angels in chapter 18.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be true if you weren't Lot. But Lot just did something to change that. Right. His actions of throwing them to the mob have essentially changed the role of the angels. The angels now have to be seen as family. And because the angels are seen as family, Lot is like, well, I don't have room in my house for everybody. Right. My daughter is going to get him out of here. And rather than there being this joyous birth of Sarah, right, there is this disgusting throwing of the angels to a mob. Right. So where do you want to go with all this? Is your takeaway from all this is that the shift in parallels highlights the corruption of Lot. That on the one hand, he's doing what Abraham did in the beginning.
And if you read without the end in mind, it's like, wow, this Lot guy, he's so welcoming. Right. He does everything that Abraham does. He's such a Baal Chesed. Right. He's inviting in these guests.
Yes, on the face of it, all of this is wonderful and sugar and spice and everything nice, the way he takes care of these guests. But he is replacing the role of children in his family, which is terrible. So, it's the great balance around the Shabbos table.
Exactly.
You pay attention to your kids. It's all about, we have the most guests that we could possibly have. And who are your kids to you? They just don't count because, you don't get very many kudos from the neighbors by having your kids over for Shabbos. But those are the people you really need to be taking care of. Those are the ones who are really seeking the shelter and the love and the nurturing and the connection with you, even more than the guests who you can be nice to, but you always have to understand that you're nice to them as guests. They're sort of extended family. There are concentric circles of family.
Yeah.
And you got to get the concentric circles of family right and not invert them. Otherwise, your kindness turns into a disaster.
Yeah. This is, by the way, this is something that I've seen and learned a lot from you, Rabbi Fohrman. The number of times where, we've had a recording schedule, something we're supposed to do, whatever, and you've told me, like, Ari, I'm really sorry, but my family needs me for X, Y, or Z. They're my priority. They come first.
Yeah, that happens a lot. So I admit to that.
But kudos to you because they are your first responsibility.
Yeah. So with that, Ari, I'm going to go home to my family.
but before we do, though, because as you pointed out, right, this isn't just one story with Lot, because it's a parallel between these two stories. And we do have to ask, why is the Torah not just telling us about Lot here, but drawing our attention also back to the Abraham story? And I just had maybe one idea here, just a possibility. This is something I noticed years ago. In the end of chapter 17, Abraham gets this new name called Avraham. He goes from Avram to Avraham, and he called Avraham because he's going to be an Av Hamon Goyim, so a father of many nations. I.e., like, it's this idea that this quality of universalism to him. And then in the next chapter, he starts being that universal guy, and he's inviting guests, and we see him being just welcoming to all. And you would think that it'd be a perfect time to really use his new name. Except there's this weird thing where it doesn't say his name. It says Vayera Elav Hashem. God appeared to him, Belane Mamrai, Vehu Yoshev, and he was sitting. And then it just keeps going on. Vayisa Enav, Vayar, Vayaratz, Vayishtachavu.
You never get the name.
You give it a name. And for the first 5 verses here, it refers to Abraham no less than 11 times.
As he, just
As
pronoun.
he. Just he. And we know it's talking about Abraham, but like you didn't even think you would throw his name there. It's his brand new, shiny name. It's all about him being universal, about him loving everybody.
Right.
And yet it doesn't use that. It doesn't use that until verse 6. And if I'm going to look at verse 6, when he finally is called Abraham.
Vayimaher Avraham O'Ela El Sarah. Oh, fascinating. So what Ari is going to argue here is that it's verse 6 that makes Abraham Abraham, which is why we hear his name. Beautiful, Ari. Right? Abraham becomes Abraham, not just him, when he's not taking care of the guests. Right. When he goes back to the woman he's actually protecting, El Sarah. That's the beginning of verse 6. Vayimaher Avraham O'Ela El Sarah. And Abraham runs into the tent, El Sarah, to Sarah, as if to say that act of relating to Sarah and not just guests, right, is what makes Abraham worthy of his name. That's really cool, Ari. I really love that. That's a beautiful idea.
Yeah. And Abraham really did have those concentric circles, right? And they, as you said, it's like these concentric circles, and to the extent that which he is Avraham Goyim, the extent which he is this universal guy and loves everybody and is welcoming to everybody, it starts within his own home, and everything, all his hospitality is an extension of that. It's an extension of that home.
Yeah.
And broadening that circle.
It reminds me, and I think this is a point which I might have made in the Less Come to Scandal series, that when you think about love really works by radiating out in concentric circles.
Uh-huh.
You got to love your family before you love guests. If you don't, you really don't have any love to give to your guests. It has to start in the family. That's the incubator for love. The best you can do is like take the love of the family and shine it outwards a little bit and let others become like extended family. But if there's nothing really within the family, there's no protectiveness, there's no taking care of, then everything else is just performative. In other words, it's what Lot is doing is mimicking Abraham. You can mimic Abraham. You can mimic the outer actions of him. Anyone can do that. But the inner love that would be driving those actions, which is the reason why Abraham did it. He wasn't mimicking anyone, right? That isn't necessarily there in Lot. He's just copying actions. In order for it to be there, he would have to have that protectiveness within the family that could then express itself outside the family as a secondary kind of thing. And the point I made, I think when I discussed this, is that V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha suggests the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
This famous idea that you should love your neighbors yourself. Why don't you say you should love your neighbors a lot, right?
Right.
Because you can't do that without loving yourself. Love of self actually is the most concentric circle.
Yeah, the innermost circle.
You have to actually, in order to do chesed, boys and girls, you actually have to love yourself. I mean, it sounds crazy, right? Like, no, I don't want to be selfish. I can't be self-serving. I live for everybody else. If you do that, it's just a farce. You're really just mimicking. You're doing what you think is the right thing to do, but not out of real love. Love has to come from, no, I actually take care of myself. I actually love myself. There's something really precious here with me that needs to be guarded and nurtured. And I take some time to rest. I take some time to enjoy life. I take some time to have some downtime. I take some time to eat. I enjoy. I take care of myself. And then having a sense of knowing what love of self actually feels like, I can take that and project it outwards to family. Okay. I can say, oh, well, I know what it means to take care of someone. I can now take care of you. I can bring you into this mix too. This really is a beautiful idea. And then you can bring others into it. And further, you can ultimately bring the whole world into it. And this is, Rav Shimon Shkop, in his introduction to Shari Yosher, a fascinating philosophical work on Talmud, the philosophy of Talmud, really. His introduction to the Shari Yosher is a meditation on this idea. It's only if you take that sense of self and then you enlarge it and say, my sense of self includes my family. My sense of self includes my friends. My sense of self includes others. Then the same energy that fuels love of self is actually fueling taking care of others and taking care of others, because I'm seeing these larger concentric circles of self in these relationships, and I'm saying, I love you like a brother. I love you as an extension of what I've learned of what it takes to love me. that was Rav Shimon's idea, but I think you see those powerful themes echoing here. So I really do need to actually go take care of my
Yeah, I was
family
gonna say
after all this.
it's actually quite late here as
right.
we're recording together
We're recording here
in Israel.
But this is beautiful. It's
yeah.
and Evan, thank you so much for this really sharp realization about the switch of cast of characters. Guys, this should be an object lesson to you out there in Aleph Beta land, that if you find intertextual parallels, this kind of overlapping language between stories, do play cast of characters. You can really see how powerful it is as a tool of methodology to be able to take you into the understanding of what's going on and why the Torah is overlaying these characters. I'm teaching a methodology course these days. This is the kind of thing that's on my mind. So I thank you, Ari,
All right. And with that,
for talking about this.
thank you. And with that, let's get home to our families.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you, Ari.